My name is Audrey Thomas. I'm a senior fashion design student pursuing a Bachelor's of Arts.
Why did you want to become a fashion design major?
I wanted to become a fashion design major because as a kid, I was really interested in it. I started sewing in high school, and I had a local internship in Louisville, Kentucky, where I'm from, with a small business owner. She did custom evening wear, I guess, and she also eventually did bridal when I interned for her again in college, and she had moved into bridal. But I basically was sewing for her, patterning for her, kind of learning the in and outs of a small business, and that's kind of what got the ball rolling for me with fashion.
So, what concentration of fashion do you want to focus on?
Yeah, so I initially came into school, as most students do, wanting to do a really high price point, wanting to do couture, ball gowns, that kind of stuff. I think a lot of people come in with the idea that they are gonna get out of school and own their own brand, have a line, basically do couture, work for Gucci, And I was definitely one of those people, but I had kind of realized through school that while that's super cool and props to anybody who wants to do that, it wasn't really my path, I guess. And I kind of discovered that I was a lot more interested in activewear, specifically performance activewear. Growing up, being an athlete and also just being a really active person, I really identified with that market the most.
Okay. So, what hardships have you faced being in this major?
I would say that the biggest hardship is time management. Even today, I have a project due tomorrow, and I was stressing about it for 2 weeks. I was working probably, I would say, almost 10 hours a day every day for 2 weeks on this project. And yesterday I was like, wow, I'm in such a good place. I have all this time. I freaked myself out so much that I don't have to do anything. And then I really slacked yesterday, and now I'm rushing. So I would say time management is definitely the biggest one, and it's something that a lot of people struggle with because I'm sure you know as well, anytime you're in a creative major, everything takes longer than you would think it would. You always run into issues. It's not like you study for a test and you just study until the test and then for 3 days before the test and then that's it. You don't really, everything's your own process, your own mind, and your own creative vision, and it's never going to be perfect. You're never going to be finished, if that makes sense. So it's really hard to time manage yourself to move through the process, because I know for me, I could spend all day on research, spend forever on research and then never actually get to the final product. So that's just kind of one of the biggest challenges. I'd say another challenge, probably just being in any creative major, is getting criticism. I think that's something that everybody has to learn. And especially, it's really hard when you're really proud of a work and you have a professor or a peer, when you do constructive criticism, which is totally fine, and everyone should be able to take that. It's part of being in a creative field. But it's really hard when you are really proud of something and someone doesn't necessarily see what you see in it. That kind of can take a lot out of you, I think.
And so, you talked about your project a little bit when you talked about time management. So can you kind of talk about what you have to do for this project?
Yeah, so I'm in a portfolio class, and basically we have 4 projects throughout the year, 2 brand projects and 2 designer and aesthetic kind of projects. Right now I'm working on my portfolio cover. So they're due next week, and you can either buy one or make your own. I chose to make my own. But basically it's just a resin cast with pressed flowers in it, and I used the CNC router over at Spark to cut my name and then practice drilling through it. So, and right now what I'm doing is I'm just sanding the lips on the edges here, because there was kind of an inconsistency with the pour, and also just to test to make sure that sanding it with the electric sander is not really gonna ruin it, I guess. So good to have a practice for that reason. So yeah, that's kind of all that is, just to even out the edges so there's it's nice and smooth, so when you're turning it, it's you're not catching anything. Yep. So there's that. Marigold, calendula. Ginkgo leaves. And I forget what these red ones are. I bought them online. Ideally, I would have pressed my own, but did not have the time or the warm weather access. So, yeah. So those are the flowers that I'm using in my molds. This is the resin, and I have to like heat it under warm water. So, sorry, I should have told you that we would be moving a little bit. Or you can stay, it's up to you. So I kind of let the water heat up. Because I found, so I did like 10 or 15 trials, and kind of what I found is that if your resin isn't like in the warm bath first, then it turns really cloudy, and you can't like see anything through it because there's so many bubbles because it's not the right temperature. So yeah, that kind of takes a minute, but. This is all very makeshift and not official. So then you have like kind of the formula is equal part resin to hardener. This one's the resin and this one's the hardener. And so I kind of just guesstimate here. Put a little gung-ho there. Okay, that looks good. And so basically I just take this cup and then I pour them in together. And this will be kind of boring because I have to mix it for 3 minutes, so I don't know. Okay, so I can kind of explain. So this one is complete because I'm happy with the thickness and all of my flowers are covered, but this one's a little bit thinner and you can see that this is kind of exposed. So I'm doing another pour in there. So I just mixed it for 3 minutes and now I make sure to really like get the edges because that's where you're gonna find air pockets. And I can show you on the one that's on my test one that I did, but it's like on the front there's a couple air pockets, but I can't sand that far down because then it'll like hit all the flowers. So you just have to kind of try your best to make sure that you really get the edges. So then I just spread it around with this mixing tool I was using. This is just like the end of one of those sponge paintbrushes that I took the sponge off of it. And this resin is self-leveling, so it'll, as long as I spread it out well, it'll flatten to like be flat and it won't have any bumps or anything like that. And once you pour, you have about 30 to 45 minutes of working time where you can still like pop any bubbles, which I'll do in a second, or move things. And so this is the third layer of this one right here. And once every layer takes a day to harden before you can do a new layer. And then it takes another 3 days after that to cast. So this one will end up taking almost a week to make. And then obviously the more layers, the longer it takes. But it's due on Wednesday, so. So it'll be done and cast by Sunday. And then I'm gonna take the CNC router, hopefully on Tuesday, because Spark Studio is closed on Sundays and Mondays. And then it's due on Wednesday, so no room for error. That's okay. I like to live on the edge. So the one that we were just working on was one of your own aesthetic ones, and I'm doing an active, adaptive kind of merge. And so basically what adaptive wear is, it is designing with the needs of more demographics, I guess, in mind. So my project is focused on sensory and motor needs. So that would be like having non-abrasive stitching, having like a certain quality thread, softer fabrics for sensory, and then motor needs would be instead of having buttons, having snaps, or like easy access pockets, on and off wheelchair access, higher rises in the back. Anything that's gonna cater to someone who might not be able to wear your standard leggings, your standard whatever in athleisure because they can't fit it, they can't get it on, like maybe they can't use the full function of their hands. So there's like interior belt loops on the inside of your leggings to help you pull them on, kind of thinking of those needs, because the whole purpose of the project is to think that everyone deserves to have put style first and have access to the same styles. And there are adaptive lines out there, which is really great because that's something new that a lot of companies like Target, Tommy Hilfiger, Nike just released shoes for motor adaptions. That's really, really great, but not all of those lines are putting style first. They're mostly just basics, which you have to start somewhere, and I'm like in no way docking them for doing that at all. I think it's amazing. But in an idealistic, perfect world, every style that you had would have a way to be adaptive for someone who needs something, if that makes sense. So that's kind of like the mission of my project right now.
Are you planning to enter your fashions into the annual fashion show?
So I have some garments I made in previous years that I'm planning to enter, and I really did want to make some additional ones this year, but it's just like kind of been a crazy semester and I haven't really had the time to really dedicate to it. So I'm still going to go for it, and if I finish something additional to put in, I will, but if I don't, then it's just how the cookie crumbles, you know.
And is there any other competitions or shows you plan on entering into?
Yeah, so me and one of my friends who's a textile student are going to enter in the HGA competition, and it's a competition where a design student and a textile student come together. The textile student creates the textiles, whether that's embroidery, weaving, knitting, or something else, and then the design student designs and creates a look from that textile. It's still in the early stages. We don't have much figured out yet, but I'm really excited to kind of work with her on that and do a collaborative project.
And so, what do you plan to do after you graduate?
After I graduate, I am working for Kohl's Corporate, where I interned this past summer in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, as an assistant designer.
Okay, cool. And what hopes do you have for the future of the fashion industry?
I would say that my big hope for the future of the fashion industry is just having more access to sustainability. I think that there are a lot of companies who are really making great strides, but they're not necessarily the most accessible, whether that's price or something else. Like if you are really into sustainability, that's a big passion of yours, it is, and you're willing to put the time and effort and money into it, it's really easy. Or I wouldn't say easy, but it's like, it's attainable to live a sustainable fashion clothing life through thrifting, upcycling, shopping those brands that are sustainable, like Patagonia, I know does a lot with that. But maybe it's something that like you're kind of into. You don't really want to put in the time to find those sustainable styles. It's not that accessible to be sustainable and trendy. And I think that's the direction that consumers want the fashion industry to go. And I think they're getting there, but not quite yet. So I'm excited to see where that goes.
And lastly, if you could give your freshman self advice coming to the fashion program, what would you say?
Yeah, I would say that the number one thing is time management. Um, that's a skill that kind of everybody needs to learn, and especially being in a creative field, like you're never gonna finish a project 100%. At least for me, there's always something I know I could change, or like maybe a month later I'd look back on and be like, why did I do it that way? That's horrible. Let's completely redo this whole project. So just kind of allowing yourself to segment out your process. Like once this section is done, like your research, it's done. Like you've done it. You can do more. You don't need to though. So just move on. I think that takes a long time. Like that does. It's a learning process. Nobody comes in to any type of creative field or schooling and know how to do that. So I think that's the number one thing.